welcome to another episode of the Power Talk Show. Our main mission is to empower you as individuals and the community to basically with success stories from leaders in different industries and businesses. So today we're meeting with one of our great guests, who is the managing director of LWK Plus Partners, which is a leading architecture and design firm, mainly rooted in Hong Kong, and it's got around 12 offices around the world. So let's welcome together Mr. Karim. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you, Rosala. How are you?
Great, thank you for asking. We're really delighted to have you with us today, and we'd like to know more about the company and more about your role, and how did the COVID-19 affect you, if it actually affected you at all?
Okay, that sounds great. We look forward to sharing our experiences with you.
Sure, great.
So, well, look, I think in general, the pandemic obviously has had a considerable impact on the construction industry and the real estate industry in general, not just here in the UAE, but regionally and even globally. However, I think ultimately, despite the challenges that we faced, we've managed very well. We haven't lost any members of staff. We've been able to keep everybody with us, thank God. And whilst there have been actions we've had to take to mitigate some of the delays and prolongations on projects, I'm pleased to say that we're seeing the market moving again. And you know, very fortunately, we've had our big neighbour next door in Saudi Arabia, who's been very active. So I know that many have been able to buffer some of the challenges here in the UAE with work across the region, particularly in Saudi. We're included in that as well. And so I think really we've had to make certain structural changes within the way we operate. We've had to innovate in terms of technology, but also in delivery methodologies across the board to ensure that business is as usual as possible.
Okay, that's amazing to hear. So I can see that you have probably implemented a lot of different activities during the pandemic. So could you give us like a short brief about that?
Well, look, I mean, being a business that has its HQ in Hong Kong and a big footprint in China, we were able to sort of, to a certain extent, forecast the impact of the pandemic, because we saw it happening earlier in Southeast Asia. And so as it started to take hold here in the UAE, we'd already transitioned everybody into remote working. And so we already had the measures in place and the protocols in place to leave the office and establish remote working stations in everybody's homes. And so ultimately, from the moment the lockdown kicked in, technologically, we were fully connected. In terms of operational, obviously, you know, when we talk about business, you know, we obviously talk about what the business does, but fundamentally, the business is all about the people who work within that business. And so one of the biggest challenges, and also actually one of the biggest pleasures, was getting to know the team better as individuals and as human beings, and understanding that one model doesn't fit everybody. Everybody has a different condition. You know, within the office environment, that's the condition, but within their home environments, how they function at home, we have to be able to adapt and help them to adapt to the situation. So that's both in terms of the environment they're working in, the access to technology that they've got themselves, but also it's about how we work with them as individuals to understand that their mentality adjusts to a less structured environment. Some people have flourished working remotely. It really suits them, particularly those with children, the ability to spend more time with one's family, even in in a less, it's not necessarily constant, but the presence of a parent at home makes a huge difference to children. And some of that has rolled on through post-pandemic. But we also had quite a few younger members of staff who lived alone and found the isolation very challenging and difficult. And so myself and other senior members spent a lot of our time actually having one-on-one conversations, and we instigated team activities in a remote working methodology. We did a number of competitions. One of the most enjoyable was we did a MasterChef lunchtime competition where everybody took turn to cook lunch and demonstrate it to the team, and the winner got a nice token to have a meal out of there.
Nice.
You know, in terms of the operations, you know, really for us, it was very much about the human resource side of operations, how we supported people, because ultimately we still need them to deliver projects. And actually we were very, very busy on a huge scale project in Saudi Arabia during that time. And we delivered it very effectively and very successfully. But that meant that we had to keep the cohesion of the team together, and running the everyday business of the business. It remained ultimately quite normal.
Okay. So one of the biggest challenges you think that you have faced during the pandemic would be what exactly?
Look, I think working remotely, the logistics of it initially we thought would be quite complicated. But as I said, because of the experience we had and the support mechanism we had from HQ, all of that headache was taken away from us. I know from others, though, that was more challenging and difficult to deal with the logistics of taking the staff out of that environment where we're always assuming that the setup is there, and getting them set up comfortably at home. Really, as I said, I think, and as is most of the thing, the biggest challenge is always people. And I mean that in a positive sense, in the sense that if you can make the environment right for your staff, and you can make it right for the resources that you have, the challenges tend to dissipate, because when people feel supported, the continuity of business continues. Yeah, we were also a little concerned about, obviously here in the region, the one-on-one relationships are very important. The personal contact is very culturally ingrained. So we were a bit concerned at how that might affect conducting meetings with clients online. But actually, I have to say, I think everybody embraced it remarkably well, and the legacy of that has continued, and I think has allowed people to understand that actually it can be a lot more effective and productive to conduct certain activities online, whereas others may continue and revert back to a more in-person activity or in-person approach to dealing with it. But certainly the challenge is always and continue to remain around people, because ultimately we're all very different, aren't we?
Yeah, definitely. So would you consider going for the remote working from in terms of, let's say, COVID ceased to exist, let's say, hopefully one day. So would you still go for a remote working?
I think we're keeping our mind open to that. I think there are members of staff that are working remotely and continue to work remotely, even though the majority of staff are back in the office. And we're also taking a more flexi approach in terms of some days in the office, some days out of the office. So, as we gradually came back to the office, we cycled the number of people into the business slowly, and then we put them in half in the one half of the week, in the other half of the week. And for some people, that's very, very effective. And so we don't have a policy of discontinuing remote working. In actual fact, we're opening up our policy to be much more embracing around specific circumstances. So not necessarily about the pandemic, but about project requirements, about people's own needs. And I think one of the things that we as a business certainly felt is that we grew closer together as a team because of the challenges of the pandemic. And whilst we always cared about our staff, having this time to actually get to know them on a one-on-one basis actually allowed us to understand that some people flourish better in the office, and certainly some of the younger staff need more guidance at the beginning of their career. Leaving them remotely, even being on the end of a VC, isn't easy for them, and they, as they're commencing their careers, a certain level of guidance is still required and reassurance to allow them to grow into strong independent professionals. So it's very much on a case-by-case basis. But I think the whole premise that people would take advantage of not being productive because they're at home, I think has been completely blown away. I think, of course, there will always be individuals who sadly abuse systems, but actually most people are very conscientious, and they enjoy working, and they find a valuable and important part of their lives, and so they take it seriously. I think it's really about setting the right set of parameters and boundaries to allow either scenario to work successfully.
Yes. Okay. So let's go for another side of the story. During the pandemic, what has your business or industry learned? What were the lessons that you guys learned from?
Look, I mean, I think if we go from a macro to micro scale, I think, a pandemic of this nature has shown how susceptible all economies are to sudden change. And I think whilst we can't necessarily impact our macro scale, as a business, we are now much more aligned in our own thinking about how we respond to substantial change in a very short period of time. And so we look at how we mitigate risk, both to the operations of the business, but also financial risk, by putting certain measures in place. We certainly look at how we structure the bottom line and how we reach those numbers, and what safeguards we put in place to act as buffers for the future. In many respects, we were very fortunate because, again, as I said, a large footprint of the business remains in China, and even though China did have its own lockdown, they emerged out of it relatively quickly, and the scale of the economy meant that they were actually the only country in the world that didn't go into into a recessionary situation, a financial crisis situation, and were able to continue to roll back into motion quite quickly. But it's allowed us within the satellite offices and the regional offices to understand that how we earn a pot of money every year. What do we do with? How do we manage that buffer? How do we invest that buffer? What do we invest that buffer into? Do we keep it safe? Do we channel it into technology? Do we channel it into wellness and healthcare? So these are some of the things that we've learned. That the macro effect of the pandemic has on the business, and I think on a micro level, the continued importance of future-proofing the business is really important, in the sense that we're very big and early investors into technology. Certainly, we continue to invest into artificial intelligence and technology, and as a business that sits within a bigger parent company, there are elements within the parent company's ownership that are very much focused on technology and how technology enables our industry to go forward, and that's something that we continue to believe in and continue to invest in. And we'll be certainly showcasing a number of launches during the Cityscape Expo this year of how smart technologies can improve our environment, and it can also safeguard and future-proof against other pandemics, because it's almost certain that this will happen again in some form or another. Maybe not a viral pandemic, who knows, but
Yeah.
as we're learning now that this pandemic is now endemic, which means that it's with us for many years to come. And so how we manage to live with that, continue to function in a normal way, and allow society and business to continue is becoming more and more the focus. And technology allows us to manage that process. And we know that Dubai is a big investor in smart technology, largely not necessarily through infrastructure, but or physical infrastructure, but certainly digital infrastructure. So a lot of the applications that the government uses are all part of smart technology. That means that it makes our on a personal level, it makes our lives easier. You know, paying bills, dealing with DEWA, dealing with the RTA, etc., dealing with the Dubai municipality can all be done through your phone. That's all smart technology, and that all also has a bigger impact on the efficiency of the economy. And those are things that we feel very committed to, as well as the traditional values of doing the right thing in the right way and caring about the environment and contributing to this community.
Okay, so having said that, and like all the lessons that you have grasped and learned during the pandemic, do you see any sort of recovery for the economy coming up soon, or what do you think about that?
Look, I mean, there are certainly, I mean, particularly within the UAE, yes, there obviously there have been a number of financial initiatives instigated by the different emirates at different levels and different scales, and of course, some emirates have a bigger capacity to support than others. But it's interesting to see how, as a nation, that's weaving itself together into a balanced story. I think ultimately there is I think Abu Dhabi did very well during the pandemic. They had a big fund to support that, and that's now trickling down to other emirates through different deals and negotiations. And certainly, look, you know, we're very fortunate as a business to have, in such a short period of time, been able to secure a privileged position within the community to be thought of certain types of projects, and we are seeing those coming to us. Others are finding it more challenging, but I think the sort of the shoots of recovery are beginning to emerge, and obviously with Expo coming, there's a lot of excitement and buzz. I don't necessarily see that specifically generating opportunity right now, but I think having a positive energy within the nation is positive in terms of helping, you know, the economy to elevate itself further. And you know, Dubai's sort of quite aggressive return to normality, I think, you know, some people would question it. I think that it's probably the right approach, in the sense that, you know, we have to learn to live with this pandemic. We have to learn to live with how to manage the outcomes that will continue to eventuate over the next years. But if we lock ourselves away, as we're seeing in places like Australia, and again, they have their own rationale behind why they do what they do, but it makes it very difficult for business and people to retain a sense of normality and for the economy to recover. And you know, without that economic generation, the means of creating wealth to then deal with future problems becomes impaired. So I think all in all, we are seeing hopeful signs. Yes.
Yes, I believe like every community or every country has adapted differently to the pandemic. So let's hope something good comes out of all of this. Do you think Expo will have like an active role in the recovery from the COVID-19, or? Look,
I mean, I think that's a complicated question. There is a yeses and there are nos. I think it's interesting. If we go back a month or two, we saw the Olympic Games in Tokyo, and they took a very specific view of how they managed that, and they kept it to be with no spectators, and no visitors to be allowed into the events, and one understands that. I think with the right measures in place, and I hope that those are going to be controlled well, because I think, social distancing is still not particularly managed well in many places. I've noticed, and I've recently come back from abroad myself, and it's no better there, and possibly worse. I think the expo will certainly generate a lot of activity and interest across our region, and one hopes that gradually, with Dubai's own more open approach to inviting people into the UAE, that it will continue to generate a level of excitement and energy that I think will have its own knock-on positive effects. Dubai has always been a hub and a meeting place, and I think it prides itself on that, and it continues to do that. Having just come through the airport yesterday, the measures are in place to do as best as we can to mitigate any issues. I was very impressed by how things have changed. I travelled in April, and it was very different then, and now it's much more streamlined. So I think that measures are in place to manage people coming into the country. I think it's also important to understand that it probably won't be as busy as it might have been pre-pandemic. In terms of economic recovery, I believe that at a global level it will have or a macro level across the economy, it will have a positive effect. Within our industry, obviously, leading up to Expo was the time when our industry boomed, because obviously all the work was being commissioned. It will be interesting to see what happens post Expo in terms of the legacy and how that will then be built upon, literally and metaphorically, to make that legacy successful. One of the biggest challenges that expos and world events, specific events are at the global level, is legacy. And you can look at a lot of Olympics projects and even expos themselves where the legacy has been well intentioned but not necessarily well implemented post event. So I believe that Dubai is taking a much broader view, and you can see that the community around Expo is being matured and nurtured. And I think the community activities and the educational activities around it will mean that the site will continue to have relevance and value going into the future.
Okay. So are you participating, like your firm is participating in the Expo directly? And how do you think the Expo will benefit your industry in terms of architecture and design?
Look, I mean, largely Expo is a national pavilion. So in terms of individual private entities participating, it's very limited. We are participating at an event at Expo, which is Cityscape this year, Cityscape Global, which we're very excited about. That's starting on the 9th of November until the 11th of November, and we're putting a lot of effort into that because it's a big event and we have had those for a while. It's a big platform for this region, and we feel it's important to support that as a business, both as to participate because it's important for us to be seen, but also we are, I think, the only architectural sponsor of Cityscape this year, and we invest a great deal of money in that. But we believe that it's important that as a global entity, we are there to ensure that those events are successful, and we have a part to play. I think it's not just about going and selling. I mean, ultimately, we're not there to sell anyway. Ultimately, we're there to share knowledge and talk about innovation and talk about the value chain that we are part of in terms of enhancing the built environment and the urban places that we create. I think all of these expos are always fascinating because it gives a real opportunity. Whether you like the pavilion designs or not, you see a myriad of hundreds of different types of architecture that are representative of lots of different cultures. And so it allows people who are not part of our profession to actually experience architecture in a very different way, in a very sort of accessible way, and in a very concentrated place. So it's like being a kid as an architect, it's like being a kid in the sweet shop. You're surrounded by 100 different jars of sweets. Which one do you want? This flavor, oh, I don't like this flavor. Oh, this flavor is my favorite flavor. So I'm looking forward to going down there on a number of occasions, and I really like the initiative that the government has introduced, which is the multiple passes, the monthly pass or the year pass, the family passes. I think it's great. When I was growing up as a child in Turkey, they used to have a summer fair every year. It was like a trade fair, but it was open to the public, and it lasted for the whole summer. And it was always something like an annual event that was really exciting to go to. I mean, there was a lot of it was very family as well. And so I'm really hoping that the interest in other cultures and other societies will be a place where families can come together safely and enjoy sharing experience of the cultures from all around the world. So that'd be fantastic. And then at the same time, experiencing wonderful architecture.
Yes. Well, we've all been waiting for this event. Like, it's been 18 months or so. So let's hope that it all goes well. And we're so excited to be part of the expo. And I wish you all the best on your journey.
Thank you.
And many more growth and success stories.
Well, that's very kind of you. And obviously, we really love being part of the Power Talk show. It's something that we really looked forward to. And we listen with anticipation to all the episodes that come out. And we hope that the viewers and the listeners will have enjoyed today's session.
I'm sure of it.
For any questions that you might have post the broadcast.
Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Karim, and it was a pleasure. And hoping to meet you for maybe face-to-face talk show next time.
That would be wonderful. Very much so.
Have a nice day, and thank you so much.
Very much. Take care.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye.